so kind of like what Toshi was saying earlier, the if underscore name. So this part is just a variable that's already defined inside of every Python file. Like just like how you can say like x is equal to 5, underscore name is just something that's already defined for you. Like for example, if I print underscore name, it'll tell me the name of what the file is. So if I run this right here, the name of this file is main, or I guess you would say underscore underscore main underscore underscore. That's the name of this file that I'm currently running. And so because it's just a predefined variable, it allows you to do a lot of cool stuff where if you're using multiple files, there are cases when this would be really, really useful. So here, let's say, here, let me move this up here instead. So basically, I'm saying print x, print y. So if I just run this file directly, it's going to do both. It's going to print x and it's going to print y. Now, if I decide to import Dunder name, which is because they're both in the same directory, I'm pretty much able to import it. And so if now if I run this second file called isthismain.py, what do you think is going to happen? Is it going to print x and y also? Because basically I've imported this file, so basically every single line of code in here should be put in here as well. So would it print x and y? Is kind of the question. What do you think?
No, because that if check, right?
Correct. It's just going to print x. And the reason why is because this file, because it's being ran secondarily. Like what I mean is because the main file that I'm running here and the command is this main.py, right? So this right here is the main file. This right here is a secondary file now. Like if I do this right here, which is print underscore underscore name. Here, let's do this.
So it's not actually like the name of the file. It's kind of like a built-in thing
Yeah,
to use as a tool.
yeah. That's a better way
Because
to.
the actual name is dundername.py.
Correct. That's the actual name of the file. So this is more of like a like a file system almost to basically let you know which one is the main file that's being ran right now, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, what I'm going to do now is rather than printing x, I'm just going to print this comment right here, or this string right here. And so let's see. If I run dunder name, which is this file, it's going to tell me the name of the file. So the name of the file is main right now. Now, if I run this one, let's see what the name of the file is going to be now. So the name of the file is actually the name of the file now. You see? Because I'm running it like secondarily. Like this is not the main file that I'm running. Like this one right here. The main file that I'm running is actually this one. So this one's just being ran, but it's just being ran secondarily.
Interesting.
So there are cases when this is useful. One case, I think what he was trying to explain in lecture today was, let's see, if you have something like add x and y, and let's say you know, this is just a very simple, you know, x plus y right here. If you wanted to test your file without needing to like, because usually, you know, maybe over here, you'll do this and then you'll do your asserts over here and stuff like that. But let's say you're not done doing that yet, and you're just running, like basically, let's say this is your test file, and your test file doesn't have anything yet, but you've already imported it. You can test underneath here. So add, let's say 1 and 1, right? And let's say we're printing whatever add 1 and 1 does. If I run the is main file, it doesn't run whatever's in the scope of this right here.
Yeah.
Which is kind of what we want. We don't want it to run this because we're not running this file. We're not running the dunder name file. We're running the is this main file. So we don't want it to include this part when we're running this file. We only want whatever is within the global scope, which is the definition of the function. And so now basically, um, if we wanted to test quickly, then that's where we would run the actual Dunder name file, and it would actually do this part. So this is good for like running quick tests essentially. Like if you just wanted to do something like this, right? Boom, you'll kind of see that it works. And then when you're actually running the real tests that should be in here, you don't want it to run the stuff that's in here anymore. You just want it to run the stuff that's here and that's in this file but in the global scope. Yeah. So for example, let's say I did something like here. Add. So now if I run this file, it only does this part. It doesn't do the stuff in here. So that's kind of the point of this right here. So if underscore name equals underscore main is just to separate the code scopes between the two files. Any questions? All right, yeah, it's pretty straightforward in my opinion if you look at it this way. I feel like Toshi kind of made it sound a little bit more complicated than it should be in the lecture, but this is pretty much the whole point of it is just this.
Yeah, I don't really like see how it can be used, but I understand that it probably has its uses somewhere if you knew what to do with it.
For sure. Okay, so the reason why this is useful is because you have to look at it from the lens of like if you were to do this in the industry. Usually, let's see.
I kind of like imagining like you have multiple PY files that make up the program or something.
Yeah, that's the thing. And the reason why this is useful is because let's say there's two people working on a Python project, right? And there's a person that's going to use the function. So use function, .py. This person that's going to use the function doesn't know how the function was created. Basically, when they look at the functions, they're just going to go over here and read this function docstring. Adds two numbers and returns the sum, right? And then it takes in arguments where the arguments is x, which is an integer. An integer, I guess, would be a good name for it. Also takes in y, and then it returns an integer. So this is how you would structure your function docstrings. So this explains what the function does. Int an integer that represents the sum of the arguments. So this is how you would kind of structure your function docstrings. And so usually, let's say there's Bob and Alice. Let's say Alice was the person who made this right here, this function file, and Bob was the one that made use function, where Bob is just using the function. Bob doesn't know how Alice wrote the add function. The way that Bob's going to know is he's just going to read this, and he's just going to take this as the description of how to use the function, right? So Bob's just basically trusting this right here. Bob basically doesn't explain. Like look at this part right here, because usually functions aren't this simple. Usually functions are like 20 lines plus, right? So they don't actually look at what the code is. They just trust this that it's gonna work. So Bob's just gonna trust that this works, and so he's just gonna use it, right? But Alice needs to actually test to see that her functions are working correctly. Like she needs to actually test down here that this adding 1 plus 1 does become 2. And so this is where, so maybe instead of having a separate like test file, she might do something like this, like 1 plus 1 equals 2. So something like that, right? So if she does something like this, then she is just going to only have access to her file, right? So Alice only
Yeah.
has access to this file. So Alice should only run this file right here. Which this is true, so it didn't show anything. That's good. And so whenever Bob imports it, right? You don't want Bob to run the code down here, because this is just for Alice's testing purposes. So that's kind of where this would kind of go into play, is that right here. Because different people work on different files, like parallel to each other, so that's why this is kind of useful.
I see.
Yeah. That I think this kind of answered both the point of if underscore underscore name equals main, and how to import files and why we want to do importing files. Let's see. I'm looking at the things that I put up. Let's see. I don't really think people want to know the difference between arguments and input. It seems like nobody voted for that, so I'll move on to scoping next, global and not global. And I kind of went over it earlier in the talk, but let's see. Global variables are just, or global scope is just anything that's defined not within the scope of anything. Like if you had an if statement here, like if 1 plus 1 equals 2, and you had some code here, let's just say print hi, right? Then this print function is within the scope of this if statement. But if you had, here I forgot to string this, but print hello world, this print hello world right here is not within any scope at all. It's not underneath anything. This is just globally, and it'll run every time you run the file. But this print hello right here, or print hi right here, only runs if this condition is true. And so basically if I did this instead, it's not going to be true, so this is not going to run. So we say that this print is within the scope of the if statement. It's true for everything else as well. Like the x and y right here is only bounded to the scope of this function. If I made another x and y up here, x equals like 5 and y equals 2 here, these x and y's right here are not the same as these x and y's down here and right here. So if I had a z in here, and let's just say my function adds 3 numbers instead, so I'm just going to do that. Right, so let's just say this is what my add does now. It's going to add 3 numbers instead. I can't use z down here. Like, I can't do a print z in here. That's not going to work. This is going to tell you, here, let's just try to run it. Why not? So, this is the file. Here, let me make this smaller so we can see the entire thing. Dunder name. It's going to tell us z is not defined. And that's true. Z isn't defined. So here, let me do this instead to kind of prove it. 1 and 1 and 1. So print, or no, let's not print it. Okay, yeah. So even though I did 1 and 1 and 1 with add here, which is going to define x and y and z, the x and y and z are only defined within the scope of everything that's indented inside of define. Or yeah. The z here is the global scope of z, and that helps kind of differentiate between different variables. And it's really useful to know this, because there are some cases when you have like many nests of like things like if statements and loops and stuff like that. So for example, if you say something like if x equals 5, which we define x up here, then let's make a z down here that is equal to 2, and then we print z, and then we try to print z again. Right. If we do this print z runs, but this print z doesn't run, because the print z, or like z, only exists within the scope of this if statement, which this has access to, but this doesn't have access to. So if you try to run this, it shouldn't work, essentially. It should error out right here, and it should say the same thing right here. Z is not defined. It doesn't tell you like due to the scope, but it just tells you Z is not defined, and that's why. And that's kind of the idea of global scoping and scoping within a statement, or like within a different uh, scope, essentially. I think that's pretty much it of what I'm going over. Any other questions about anything? I don't know if the modules for this week had any other material, but this is kind of most of the material for this week, kind of put in together into one video. All right. Okay. Yeah, that's pretty much it.